There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with sitting across from someone who's supposed to be yours. Eris knew that feeling well. She sat in the back corner of Marcella's, one of those places where the lighting is expensive and low, where every table feels like its own private world. Her date, Marcus, was talking about something. His job, maybe, or a trip he took last summer. She wasn't really listening, not because he was boring exactly. He seemed nice enough. Stable. Normal. The kind of man who'd remember your coffee order and ask about your day. The kind of man her husband had never been. She twisted the platinum band on her finger without thinking. 3 years she'd worn it. 3 years of sleeping in separate wings of a house too big for 2 people who barely spoke. 3 years of being Mrs. SHIN Ha-jun in name only. Marcus noticed the ring, of course. She hadn't tried to hide it. "So," he said, leaning back with that careful curiosity people use when they know they're stepping into something messy. "You mentioned things are complicated." Eris smiled. Not a real smile. The kind she'd perfected at charity galas and business dinners where she stood next to Shin like expensive furniture. Seen but not heard. Present but not acknowledged. "That's one word for it," she said. She'd met Marcus at a gallery opening 2 weeks ago. He worked in tech consulting, knew nothing about her family, nothing about Shin's world. That was the appeal. For 2 weeks, she'd texted him like a normal person, made plans like a normal person, pretended her life was something it wasn't. Her father had arranged her marriage the way other men arranged mergers. Clinical. Strategic. The Beck family needed Shin's connections. Shin's family needed legitimacy, the kind that came with old American money and a respectable last name. Eris was the signature on a contract she never got to read. 23 years old and already sold. She felt it before she saw him. That cold pressure at the base of her skull. The way the air seems to change when someone's watching you. Eris had developed instincts living in Shin's world. You learn to sense danger the way animals sense storms coming. Marcus was still talking. Something about blockchain. Or maybe it was AI. She nodded at appropriate intervals, but her attention had fractured. Her eyes moved to the entrance, then the bar, then the tall windows looking out onto the street where black cars liked to idle. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. Shin hadn't touched her once in 3 years. Not on their wedding night. Not on the honeymoon in Jeju that felt like a business trip with better views. Not in the sprawling penthouse they shared in name only, where whole days could pass without them occupying the same room. He was polite, distant. He made sure she had everything she needed. Credit cards with no limits, a driver, access to any door in the city. But he never asked what she wanted. Never asked if she was happy. Never looked at her like she was anything more than an obligation he'd checked off a list. Her father said she'd grow into the role. That marriage was about partnership, not passion. That she was doing something important for the family. But her father hadn't warned her about the emptiness, and the way you can share a last name with someone and still feel like a ghost in your own life. Marcus reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "You okay?" he asked. "You seem like you're somewhere else." She was somewhere else. She'd been somewhere else for 3 years. "I'm here," she lied. "Sorry, just thinking." About him? She didn't answer right away. The truth was complicated. She didn't think about Shin the way you think about someone you love. She thought about him the way you think about a locked door you've stopped trying to open. Background noise. Constant, but meaningless. "No," she said finally. And maybe that was the saddest part. She didn't think about him at all anymore. Marcus smiled, encouraged. He started talking about a weekend trip. Maybe the coast. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere they could actually get to know each other without the weight of whatever her life was pressing down on them. It sounded nice. It sounded impossible. Eris had learned early in her marriage that she wasn't really a person anymore. She was an asset. A name attached to papers filed in offices she'd never seen. Her father called it duty. Shin called it nothing. He didn't call it anything. He barely acknowledged their arrangement existed outside the paperwork. But she knew what she was. A bridge between two empires. A business card in human form. The cold feeling intensified. She'd been stupid to think she could do this. Stupid to think that after 3 years of being invisible, she could just step outside the lines Shin had drawn around her life without consequences. Because even if Shin didn't want her, even if he treated their marriage like an inconvenience he tolerated with detached professionalism, she was still his. On paper. In the world that mattered to men like him. And men like Shin didn't let their possessions wander. Eris. Marcus was looking at her with concern now. Real concern. The kind that came from actually seeing someone, not just looking through them. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. Yes. She wanted to leave. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to rewind 3 years and tell her father no. Tell him she wouldn't sign, wouldn't smile for photos, wouldn't trade her life for his business interests. But that wasn't how this worked. "I should probably go," she said quietly. This was a mistake." Marcus looked hurt but not surprised, like he'd known from the beginning this was borrowed time. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Eris stood, gathering her coat, her purse. She didn't answer because she didn't know. She didn't know what happened next. Didn't know if the feeling crawling up her spine was paranoia or instinct. Didn't know if walking out of this restaurant meant walking into something worse. What she did know was this. She'd been invisible for 3 years. And maybe, somewhere in the back of her mind, she'd wanted Shin to notice, to care, to show even the smallest sign that his wife was more than paperwork. Be careful what you wish for. The car was waiting at the curb. Black, expensive, the kind that didn't need license plates to tell you who owned it. And standing beside it, backlit by streetlights and the cold glow of the city, was the man who'd ignored her for 3 years. SHIN Ha-jun didn't look angry. He never looked angry. That was the problem. He looked the way he always looked. Controlled, calculating, untouchable. But his eyes were on her. For the first time in 3 years, his eyes were actually on her. And Eris realized, with a sick, sinking feeling, that being invisible might have been safer. Real quick, if you're already feeling the tension in Eris's world, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Your stories matter here. And if you're hooked, hit subscribe. This story gets darker before it gets better, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Shin didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. Eris sat as far from him as the backseat allowed, her body angled toward the window, watching the city blur past. Her heart was doing something erratic in her chest. Not quite fear. Not quite anger. Something in between that she didn't have a name for. He'd opened the car door himself. Hadn't said a word. Just looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes and waited. And she'd gotten in. Because what else was she supposed to do? Make a scene on a public street? Run? To where? The partition between them and the driver was up. Soundproof. She knew because she'd tested it once, months ago, screaming at the top of her lungs just to see if anyone would hear. No one had. 3 years, Shin said finally. His voice was quiet, measured. The same tone he used in boardrooms when he was about to destroy someone's livelihood. 3 years, and you never asked for anything. Eris didn't turn to look at him. I asked for plenty, you just weren't listening. And now you're fucking around with tech consultants in restaurants I own. There it was, on the possessive edge she'd never heard before. It would have been almost satisfying if it wasn't so hollow. Too little, too late, wrapped up in arrogance. I wasn't... She stopped herself. Why was she explaining? Why did she owe him an explanation for having coffee with another human being when he'd spent 3 years treating her like expensive wallpaper? The patterns had started small. 2 weeks ago, after she'd met Marcus at the gallery, she'd noticed the security detail changing. Not the men themselves. Shin always had people watching. That was standard. But their positions. Instead of staying in the lobby, in the garage, at the building perimeter, they'd gotten closer. One outside the coffee shop where she met friends. One in the parking garage when she went to her Pilates class. One lingering near the entrance of her favorite bookstore. And she thought she was being paranoid. Shin had never cared where she went before. Why would he start now? You had me followed, she said. Not a question. You're my wife. In name only. You made that very clear. Something flickered across Shin's face. Too quick to read. Too practiced to be real emotion. He was good at this. At showing nothing. Giving nothing away. It was probably what made him so dangerous in his world. No weakness. No cracks. Things change, he said. Do they? Flat. Because she was tired of his cryptic bullshit. Tired of trying to decode a man who'd turned indifference into an art form. The car stopped in front of their building. Not a building. The building. 62 floors of steel and glass in the heart of the financial district. Shin owned the top 5 floors. They lived on the highest one, as if elevation could somehow separate them from the rest of the world. Eris reached for the door handle. Shin's hand caught her wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop her. Firm enough to remind her that he could. We're not done, he said. We were never started. She pulled away, harder than necessary, and got out before he could respond. The doorman pretended not to notice. Everyone in Shin's orbit had learned to be selectively blind. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Eris watched the numbers climb, watched her reflection multiply in the polished brass and mirrored panels. She looked tired. Not just tonight. Tired. Soul tired. The kind that settles into your bones when you've been performing a role for too long. Mrs. SHIN Ha-jun. What a joke. She didn't even know if Shin had other women. Probably. Men like him didn't do celibacy. They just did discretion. And honestly, she didn't care. She'd stopped caring about what he did in his private life around month 6, when it became clear she'd never be part of it. What bothered her was this sudden attention, this jealousy from a man who'd never shown the slightest interest in her existence. The penthouse was dark when she entered. She didn't turn on the lights. Just walked through the familiar shadows to the kitchen, poured herself vodka she didn't really want, and stood at the window looking out at the city. Behind her, she heard the elevator doors open, Shin's footsteps, measured, deliberate, moving through the space like he owned it. He did own it. He owned everything. You didn't answer my question, Shin said. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and it was the most casual she'd seen him in months, and somehow that made this worse. More intimate than anything they'd shared. You didn't ask a question. You made a statement about restaurants you apparently own. How long? How long what? How long have you been seeing him? Eris laughed. Actually laughed. Sharp and humorless. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of coffee and 1 dinner. That's it. And before you ask, no, I haven't fucked him. Haven't fucked anyone, actually, since you've never touched me and I was stupid enough to think marriage meant something. Shin moved closer, not aggressive, but deliberate, closing the distance between them in a way he never had before. That bothers you, he said, not a question. What bothers me, Eris said slowly, is that you care now. Where was this energy for 3 years? Where was any of this when I was sleeping 15 feet away from you every night wondering if my husband was even human or just a very sophisticated robot? I was protecting you. From what? He didn't answer. Just looked at her with those dark eyes that gave away nothing. And that was the pattern, wasn't it? SHIN never explained, never justified. He made decisions and expected the world to fall in line. You don't get to do this, Eris said. Her voice was shaking now. 3 years of nothing and suddenly, everything. You don't get to ignore me for 1,000 days and then get jealous when someone else shows basic human interest. That's not how this works. This isn't about jealousy. Then what is it about? You're in danger. The words landed wrong. Too dramatic. Too convenient. Eris set down her glass before she threw it. I've been in danger since the day I married you. Don't pretend you suddenly care. But even as she said it, her mind was cataloging the changes, the patterns she'd noticed but hadn't connected. The new security detail. The phone calls SHIN took behind closed doors, his voice low and urgent. The way certain rooms in the penthouse had been locked recently, rooms that used to be open. The text from her father last week. Stay close to home for a while. And Marcus. Sweet, normal Marcus, who'd asked her out twice more this week, but whose number had somehow ended up disconnected this morning when she tried to confirm plans. What aren't you telling me? She asked. A lot of things. That's the arrangement. I didn't agree to be kept in the dark. You agreed when you signed the papers. And there it was. The truth he'd never bothered to hide. She was property, an asset. A chess piece moved around the board by men who never asked if she wanted to play. She left him standing in the kitchen, walked to her bedroom, her separate, lonely bedroom, and locked the door. Not that it mattered. SHIN had keys to everything. But the gesture felt important. A line drawn, even if it was just in sand. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out her phone. Marcus's number was still disconnected. She tried the gallery where they'd met. The woman who answered said they had no record of anyone by that name, like he'd been erased. Her hands were shaking. She scrolled through her contacts, started texting her best friend, Aisha. The message wouldn't send. Network error. She tried again. Same thing. Called instead. It rang once, then disconnected. Tried her other friend, Jessica. Straight to voicemail. Full voicemail. The patterns were there now. Undeniable. She'd been so focused on SHIN's sudden attention she'd missed the larger picture, the walls closing in, the world shrinking. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment before opening the message. We should talk. About options. About what happens next. H, just one letter. H. But Eris knew who it was. Everyone in their world knew who H was. Hyun. The rival. The enemy. The man SHIN's organization had been positioning against for the past 2 years. She should have deleted it. Should have shown SHIN. Should have done a dozen things that a good wife would do. Instead, she saved the number and turned off her phone. Because the pattern was clear now. SHIN didn't want her, but he didn't want anyone else to have her either. And somewhere in the margins of a war she didn't understand, she'd become valuable. She just didn't know why. Her father's summons came 3 days after the restaurant, not a request. A summons. The difference mattered in Richard Beck's world. Requests could be declined. Summons were commands dressed in polite language, and you showed up, or there were consequences. Eris hadn't been to Beck Industries in 6 months. Her father preferred it that way. His daughter the trophy wife, safely married off, no longer his problem. But the text had been clear. My office. 9 a.m. Don't be late. She wasn't late. She was never late. 3 years with SHIN had taught her that much. Precision, control, the performance of compliance even when everything inside you was screaming. Her father's assistant barely looked up when Eris arrived. Just gestured toward the closed double doors with the kind of dismissive efficiency reserved for people who weren't quite important enough to warrant actual attention. Eris pushed through without knocking. Richard Beck stood at the windows of his corner office, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the city like a general surveying territory. He didn't turn when she entered. Didn't acknowledge her presence for a full 30 seconds. Power play. She recognized it. Shin did the same thing. "You've been making poor decisions," her father said finally. Not, "Hello," not, "How are you?" Just accusation, delivered in that flat executive tone that had terrified her as a child. "Good morning to you too, Dad." "Don't." He turned now, and his face was harder than she remembered. Older. And the past 3 years had carved new lines around his mouth, new shadows under his eyes. "I didn't arrange your marriage so you could fuck it up with middle management tech consultants." So Shin had talked to him. Of course he had. The two of them probably had lunch, discussed her like she was a stock performance. Disappointing returns. Needs correction. "I had coffee with someone," Eris said evenly. "Once. That's not fucking anything up." "You had dinner. At a restaurant owned by your husband's rival's cousin, while wearing a dress I'm told cost more than most people's cars. You think that doesn't send a message?" She hadn't known. Hadn't thought about which restaurant, who owned it, what it meant in the complex web of alliances and territories that governed Shin's world. That was the problem. And she'd been so desperate for something normal, something hers, that she'd been careless. Stupid. "I didn't know," she said. "You should have known. That's what you're supposed to do. Think. Be aware. You're not some civilian anymore, Eris. You're a Shin. Every move you make is strategic whether you intend it or not." "I didn't ask to be a Shin." Her father's expression didn't change. "No. You asked for a trust fund and a life of comfort. This is the price." The worst part was that he wasn't wrong. She had been comfortable. 3 years of unlimited credit cards, designer clothes, charity galas where people pretended to care about her opinions. She'd traded her autonomy for security, and now she was complaining about the terms. Except that wasn't fair either. She'd been 23, fresh out of college, and her father had presented Shin like he was doing her a favor, a good match, a powerful family. She'd be set for life. He'd left out the part about being alone for life. "Why are you really here?" Eris asked. "If you just wanted to yell at me about dinner, you could have done that over the phone." Richard moved to his desk, pulled out a folder, slid it across the polished wood toward her. "Because things are changing, and you need to understand your role." She didn't want to open it. Something in her gut said that whatever was inside would make everything worse. But her hand moved anyway, muscle memory from 3 years of doing what she was told. Inside were photographs, documents, names she half recognized from Shin's carefully neutral dinner conversation. And at the center of it all, Ha-jun. "Shin's organization is fracturing," her father said. "Internal pressure, external threats. Ha-jun's making moves, buying loyalty, positioning himself to take over half of Shin's territory within the year. Maybe more." Eris stared at a photo of Ha-jun. Older than Shin. Harder. The kind of handsome that came with sharp edges and dangerous intelligence. "What does this have to do with me?" "Everything." Richard sat down, steepled his fingers. "You're the legitimacy, the American connection, the bridge between Shin's organization and our networks. If his position weakens, if Ha-jun moves against him, you become a very valuable asset. To both sides. The security detail, the sudden attention." Shin's appearance at the restaurant. He wasn't jealous. He was protecting an investment, when her father wasn't concerned about her happiness or her safety. He was concerned about the family's position in whatever war was coming. "You want me to stay with Shin?" she said slowly. No matter what, because if I don't, Beck Industries loses access. I want you to be smart. Shin keeps his wife close during uncertain times. You stay visible, stay loyal, and when this settles, however it settles, you're positioned correctly. And if Shin loses? Her father's smile was thin. Then you make sure you're valuable to whoever wins. She left her father's office with the folder under her arm and a weight in her chest that made breathing difficult. The car was waiting. Different driver. Same black sedan. Same tinted windows that turn the city into shadows. Her phone buzzed as they pulled into traffic. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. And the gallery where we met. Come alone. Heiress stared at the message. She should tell Shin. Should tell her father. Should do everything a good wife, a good daughter, a good chess piece would do. Instead, she typed back. Why should I? The response came immediately. Because you want answers. Because you're tired of being moved around by men who don't see you. Because I'm offering you a choice. Shin was in the living room when she got home. Also unusual. He was usually gone until late, returning after she'd already locked herself in her bedroom, avoiding the quiet war of their shared space. He looked up when she entered. Had a drink in his hand. Whiskey. Neat. The folder from her father's office sat on the coffee table between them. He showed you, Shin said. Not a question. Eris set down her purse. Carefully. Everything in Shin's presence required care. He explained the situation, the way he sees it. And how do you see it? She almost laughed. When had he ever cared how she saw anything? But his expression was serious, almost concerned if Shin was capable of such a thing. I see that I'm a pawn who's suddenly valuable. I see that you've spent 3 years ignoring me and now you're pretending to care because your position is weak. I see that everyone in my life sees me as an asset except me. Shin stood, moved toward her. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cold, like everything else about him. You think I don't care, he said quietly. I think you care about control, about appearances, about winning whatever game you're playing with Hyun. I don't think you care about me. You're wrong. Then prove it. Tell me the truth. All of it. Why did you really marry me? What's happening with your organization? Why am I suddenly so important after 3 years of being furniture? For a moment she thought he might actually answer. Might actually let her in. But then the mask settled back into place. And he was Shin again. Controlled. Impenetrable. It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated. I'm tired of complicated. I'm tired of being protected from information I deserve to have. I'm tired of feeling like a stranger in my own life. She pushed past him, headed for her bedroom. His hand caught her arm, gentle but firm. Eris. She stopped but didn't turn around. Don't meet with Hyun, Shin said. Whatever he's offered you, it's not real. He's using you to get to me. She should have been surprised that he knew. She wasn't. Shin knew everything. That was his gift and his curse. And you're not using me? She asked. He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. That night, Eris made a decision that she knew would change everything. She packed a small bag. Nothing obvious. Just things she'd need for a day or two. Clothes. Toiletries, her passport, which she kept hidden in a locked box Shin probably didn't know about. At midnight she wrote a note. Simple. Clear. I need space to think. Don't follow me. She left it on the kitchen counter where he'd find it in the morning. And then she walked out of the penthouse, past the security in the lobby who were paid to watch but not to stop her, and into the night air that felt like the first real breath she'd taken in 3 years. She checked into a hotel under her maiden name. The clerk didn't ask questions. Money smoothed over curiosity. The room was generic, Beige walls, reproduction art, a bed that didn't carry the weight of 3 years of loneliness. She sat on the edge of it and pulled out her phone. The message to Ha-jun was already drafted. "I'll be there. 2 p.m. Her thumb hovered over send. This was the moment. The point where she stopped being moved around the board and started moving herself. The point where the consequences became real and irreversible. She thought about Shin's face when he'd asked her not to go. The closest thing to vulnerability she'd ever seen from him. She thought about her father's cold calculation, the way he'd mapped out her life like a business strategy. She thought about 3 years of being invisible, of being used, of being alone in a marriage that was really just a contract with breathing parties. And then she pressed send. Her phone rang 30 seconds later. Shin. She let it go to voicemail, then called again, and again. 15 times in 10 minutes before he finally stopped. A text came through instead. "This is a mistake." Maybe it was. Probably it was. But it was her mistake to make. Finally. After 3 years of living someone else's life, making someone else's choices, being someone else's property. Tomorrow she would meet Hyun. Tomorrow she would hear what he had to offer. And tomorrow she would decide, really decide, what her life was going to be. Tonight, she was just going to sit in this anonymous hotel room and feel, for the first time in 1,000 days, like a person instead of a pawn. Even if it destroyed everything, especially if it destroyed everything. The gallery looked different in daylight, less romantic, more exposed. The white walls and concrete floors created echoes that made every footstep feel too loud, too obvious. Eris walked through rooms of abstract installations, past sculptures that looked like frozen violence, searching for a man she'd never actually met. She found him in the back gallery, standing in front of a massive canvas, all blacks and deep reds, like a wound that hadn't healed. Hyun was older than his photos suggested, maybe 45. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of man who made you feel studied before you'd even spoken. He didn't turn when she approached, just kept staring at the painting. "It's called The Cost of Empire," he said. "Fitting, don't you think?" Eris stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to run if she needed to. "You wanted to meet," she said. "I'm here." Hyun finally looked at her. Really looked. Not the way men usually looked at her, assessing beauty or status. This was different, clinical. Like he was reading something written beneath her skin. "You look like someone who hasn't slept," he observed. "I look like someone who's had 3 years to think about her choices. And now you're ready to make new ones." He gestured to a bench. "Sit. Please. I promise you're safe here. My people are watching, but so are Shin's. We're in a bubble of mutual assured surveillance. Very civilized." She sat. Against every instinct. Against 3 years of being told that Hyun was the enemy, the threat, the monster in Shin's carefully controlled world. "Why am I here?" Eris asked. "And don't tell me it's because you care about my well-being. And I've had enough of powerful men pretending to care." Hyun smiled. Not warm, but honest. "I like that. The directness." Shin chose better than he knew. He leaned back. "You're here because you're leverage, and because you're wasted where you are, and because I think, if given the choice, you'd rather be a player than a piece." "Everyone keeps calling me leverage. No one's explained what that actually means." "Then let me be the first to give you the truth your husband won't. 3 years ago, Shin's father arranged your marriage. Not Shin, his father. Because the old man knew the organization was vulnerable, too many enemies, too much exposure. They needed legitimacy. American legitimacy. Old money. Political connections. Your father's connections." Eris felt something cold settle in her stomach. I know this part. You know the surface. Here's what you don't know. Shin fought it. Didn't want a wife. Didn't want the complication. But his father insisted. And in our world, you don't refuse your father. Not if you want to inherit what he's built. This was new. Shin had never mentioned fighting the marriage. He'd presented it as mutual agreement, beneficial arrangement, two families aligning interests. So he resented me from the start? Eris said quietly. No. Hyun's voice was firm. He distanced himself because he knew what was coming. Shin's father died 8 months after your wedding. Heart attack. Sudden. Convenient. Eris stared at him. You're saying. I'm saying nothing. I'm telling you facts. Shin inherited an organization in chaos. Half his father's lieutenants didn't respect him. Thought he was too American. Too soft. Too young. Each they wanted traditional leadership. They wanted me. So why didn't they get you? Because Shin is smarter than people give him credit for. He started cleaning house. Quietly. Systematically. Anyone who questioned his authority had accidents, business failures, legal troubles. Over 3 years, he's removed or neutralized every major threat to his position. Everyone except me. Eris's mind was racing through 3 years of overheard phone calls, Shin's late nights, the men who stopped coming to the penthouse, the names that disappeared from conversation. She'd thought he was just busy, building his empire. She hadn't realized he was fighting for survival. And where do I fit in this? She asked. You're the reason he won. Your father's political connections. Your family's legitimate business front. Every move Shin made, he could justify because of the Beck alliance. You gave him armor. You just didn't know you were wearing it too. But now the board is resetting. I've consolidated power, built alliances Shin can't touch, and I'm ready to make my move. When I do, Shin falls. The question is, what happens to you when he does? There it was. The real reason for this meeting. Not concern. Not rescue. Strategy. You want me to betray him? Eris said. I want you to choose yourself. There's a difference. Hyun pulled out a document. Thick. Official looking. Slid it across the bench between them. This is a contract. My organization will buy out your marriage arrangement. $3 million paid directly to you. Not your father. Not Shin. You. Plus a position in my legitimate operations. Real power. Real autonomy. You walk away free. $3 million. Her freedom. A life that was actually hers. It sounded too good. It sounded like another cage with better marketing. And what do you get? Eris asked. Besides whatever damage this does to Shin? I get the Beck family alliance. Your father's already indicated he'd be amenable to new arrangements if your marriage dissolved. And I get you. Someone who understands both worlds. Someone I can actually trust to be competent. You don't know me. I know you've survived 3 years in Shin's world without breaking. I know you're smart enough to see through bullshit. I know you went to that restaurant with Marcus because you were testing boundaries, seeing if anyone was still paying attention. That's not weakness. That's reconnaissance. Eris stood. Needed to move. Needed to think. You make it sound so simple. Sign a paper. Walk away. Start over. It's not simple. Nothing in our world is simple, but it's possible. More possible than fixing a marriage to a man who's been using you as a shield for 3 years. He said he was protecting me. He was protecting himself. You were just the most convenient method. Hyun stood too. Look, I'm not going to pretend I'm the good guy here. I'm not. But at least I'm honest about what I want and what you'd be getting into. Shin's been lying to you since day one. About why he married you. About why he kept his distance. About what you actually mean to him. What does he say I mean to him? The question came out smaller than Eris intended. Vulnerable. After 3 years of pretending not to care, the need to know felt like admitting defeat. Hyun moved beside her. Not touching. Just present. He says you're the best decision he ever made, that keeping you separate kept you safe, that the distance was mercy, not cruelty. That's bullshit. Probably. Or maybe it's true and that makes it worse. Maybe he convinced himself that neglect was protection, that ignoring you was love. Rich people are good at that. Reframing selfishness as sacrifice. Hyun's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Something changed in his expression, hardened. We need to leave. Now. What? Why? Shin knows you're here. He's 10 minutes out with enough security to make this messy. I can get you out safely, but we need to move. Eris felt panic spike. I came alone. I was careful. You were followed from the moment you left your hotel. Probably before that. Shin doesn't take chances, especially not now. And so either you come with me, or you stay and face whatever conversation he's coming here to have. Your choice, but make it fast. Through the gallery windows, Eris could see them. Black SUVs, too many. Moving with precision that spoke of coordination and force. Hyun was already moving toward the back exit. He paused at the door. This is it, Eris. Right now. You decide what your life looks like. You can go back to Shin, back to being invisible, back to being used. Or you walk through this door with me and at least you choose your cage. The contract was still on the bench. $3 million. Her freedom. Or some version of it. Behind her, the gallery entrance doors opened. She heard footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving with purpose. Eris. Shin's voice. She'd know it anywhere. Quiet. Controlled. But underneath, something desperate, and something she'd never heard before. She turned. Shin stood in the entrance. No security visible, but she knew they were there. He looked. Wrong. His tie was loose, hair slightly mussed. 3 years and she'd never seen him anything less than perfectly composed. He looked terrified. Don't, he said, just that. Please, don't. And Eris realized with sickening clarity that there was no good choice here. Hyun was using her. Shin had been using her. Her father had sold her. Everyone in this equation saw her as a means to an end. The only question was which end she wanted to serve. Or if there was any way to serve herself. Time did something strange in that moment, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Eris could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the texture of air in her lungs, could see every micro-expression on both men's faces. Hyun at the back exit, freedom, power, the unknown. Shin at the entrance, the devil she knew. 3 years of loneliness, 3 years of questions, and her, standing between them, holding the weight of a choice that would define everything that came after. Eris. Shin took a step forward. Just one. His hands were visible, empty, open. I know what he offered you. I know what it looks like. But please, give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to explain. Hyun laughed. Sharp. Bitter. 3 years and now you want 5 minutes. That's rich. Stay out of this, Shin said, not looking at him, eyes only on Eris. This is between me and my wife. I'm not your wife, Eris said quietly. I'm a contract you inherited. There's a difference. Something cracked in Shin's expression. Real pain. She'd never seen him in pain before. Anger. Yes. Frustration, cold calculation, but not this raw, exposed hurt. You're right, he said. You're right, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every day of the past 3 years. I'm sorry for making you feel invisible. I'm sorry for being a coward who thought distance would keep you safe when all it did was make you lonely. Safe from what? Eris demanded. The question that had been building for days, for years. Everyone keeps saying you were protecting me. From what, Shin? What was so dangerous that you had to lock me out of my own marriage? Shin ran a hand through his hair. The gesture was so human, so unlike him, that Eris almost forgot to breathe. From me, he said finally. From my world. From the things I have to do to survive in it. He gestured around them. You know what Hyun told you. Some of it's true. My father's lieutenants didn't respect me. They saw me as weak, too American, not ruthless enough. And they were right to worry, because I didn't want to be what my father was. So you became it anyway, Eris said. I became what I had to become, and every person I removed, every threat I neutralized, every brutal calculation I made, I did it knowing you were in the penthouse, separate, clean, untouched by what I was becoming. I thought if I kept you separate, you wouldn't have to carry the weight of what I was doing. That's not protection, Eris said. That's cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. I know that now. But 3 years ago, I was 28 and terrified, and I thought... Shin's voice broke. Actually broke. I thought if you didn't know me, you couldn't be used against me. If you didn't love me, my enemies couldn't hurt me through you. If I kept you at a distance, you'd be safe when everything inevitably fell apart. How'd that work out? Ha-jun called from the back. Because from where I'm standing, she's right in the middle of everything anyway. Difference is, she's been suffering alone while you played stoic hero. Shin finally looked at him. You don't get to speak about suffering. You killed my father. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Irreversible. Eris looked at Ha-jun, waiting for the denial, the explanation, something. Hyun just smiled, sad, knowing. Finally, took you 3 years to say it out loud. You killed his father? Eris's voice sounded far away. The heart attack was induced, Shin said. Potassium chloride. Untraceable if you know what you're doing. Ha-jun's people knew what they were doing. He turned back to Ha-jun, and I've spent 3 years building a case. 3 years of evidence. 3 years of patience waiting for the right moment to destroy you the way you destroyed him. And using your wife as bait the entire time, Hyun said. Tell her, Shin. Tell her the real reason you married her. Why you kept her close but separate. Why you let me think she was available. Shin closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were on Eris. Only on her. My father arranged the marriage before he died, but I maintained it because I needed Hyun to believe you were my weakness. That if he wanted to hurt me, he'd come for you. And when he did, I'd have him. Conspiracy. Attempted kidnapping. Everything I needed to dismantle his organization legally and permanently. The floor felt unsteady beneath Eris's feet. I was bait, she said. For 3 years, you used me as bait. Yes. The honesty was almost worse than the lie would have been. No justification, no spinning, just yes. And the distance? The separate bedrooms? The neglect? Made you seem attainable? Made Hyun think there was an opening? Made you... Shin's voice dropped. Made you real to him instead of just an extension of me. I needed him to see you as a person. Someone worth recruiting. Someone he could use. Eris sat down. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. So this. She gestured at the contract. This offer? The money? The position? The freedom? This was you making your move. Hyun had the grace to look almost apologetic. Yes. And no. Yes. I knew Shin was using you. I've known for 2 years. But the offer is real, Eris. You think I'd go through this much trouble for simple revenge? You're smart. Capable. You've survived in a world that was designed to break you, and you're still standing. I don't need you to hurt Shin. I want you because you're actually valuable. But you'd hurt Shin anyway, Eris said. That's just a bonus. A significant bonus. So let me understand, Eris said slowly, working through it. Through 3 years of lies and half-truths and careful manipulation. Shin married me as bait, kept me lonely and isolated to make me vulnerable to outside offers. Hyun made the offer knowing it was a trap, but also genuinely wanting to recruit me. And my father? She laughed. Hollow. My father just sold me to whoever would pay, didn't he? He doesn't care which one of you wins as long as Beck Industries stays connected to the winner. Neither man answered. The silence was answer enough. Everyone used me, Eris continued. Everyone saw me as a tool, a weapon, a bridge, leverage. Everything except a person. That's not... Shin started. Don't. Eris stood. Don't you dare tell me that's not true when you just admitted you've been using me as bait for 3 years. Don't insult me by pretending any of this was about protecting me when it was always about protecting yourself. She moved to the painting, the cost of empire. All those blacks and reds, wounds that hadn't healed. You know what's funny? She said, not looking at either of them. I thought I was going crazy. 3 years of wondering what was wrong with me, why my husband didn't want me, why I felt so empty, why nothing made sense. Turns out I wasn't crazy. I was just the only person in the room who didn't know the game being played. Eris? Both men said it simultaneously. She held up a hand. No. I'm done listening to men explain why they had to hurt me. I'm done with both of you. She pulled out her phone, dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Her father answered on the first ring. I want a meeting, Eris said. Tonight. You, me, and the Beck Industries board. I'm done being traded like stock. I want my stake, my actual stake in the family business. The one you promised when I was 21, before you decided I was more valuable as a wife than as an executive. Eris, this isn't the time. Make it the time. Or I go to every news outlet in the city and explain how Beck Industries maintains its connections to organized crime through arranged marriages. I'm sure the SEC would be very interested in that story. She hung up before he could respond. When she turned back to Shin and Ha-jun, she was different. 3 years of being moved around had burned away. What was left was sharper, angrier, more dangerous. Here's what's going to happen, she said. I'm taking my father's company, or enough of it to matter. I'm going to build something that doesn't depend on either of you, and then... She looked at Shin, really looked at him. Then you and I are going to renegotiate our arrangement. New terms. Real terms. Where I'm a partner, not property. And if I say no? Shin asked quietly. Then I sign Hyun's contract and you lose everything my family brings to your organization. Your legitimacy, your political connections, your armor. All of it. Ha-jun laughed. Genuine this time. Appreciative. I underestimated you. We all did. Yes, Eris said. You did. Are we done here? For now. Hyun moved toward the exit, paused. The offer stands, by the way, if you ever decide you want out for real. No games, no manipulation, just business. I'll keep that in mind. He left through the back, his security melting away like they'd never been there. A threat that had served its purpose and moved on to the next target. Which left Eris and Shin alone in the gallery. 3 years of marriage, and this was the first real conversation they'd ever had. I do love you, Shin said after a long silence. I know you don't believe me. I know I have no right to ask you to believe me. But I need you to know, keeping you at a distance nearly killed me. Every night. Every day. Watching you become smaller. Quieter. Watching you disappear. And knowing I was the one doing it. Then why didn't you stop? Eris asked. If it hurt so much, why didn't you just tell me the truth? Because I thought I could have both, I thought I could keep you safe and get my revenge and we'd—" He shook his head. "I don't know what I thought. That you'd wait. That you'd understand someday. That love could survive 3 years of neglect because the intention was good." "Love doesn't survive neglect," Eris said. "It dies. Slowly. Quietly. Until you can't even remember what it felt like to begin with." "So what now?" Shin asked. Eris picked up Hyun's contract, studied it one last time. $3 million. Her freedom. A way out. Then she tore it in half. "Now?" She met his eyes. "Now you earn me. Not as bait. Not as leverage. As your wife. Your partner. Your equal. You want me to stay? You want this marriage to mean something? Then you make it mean something. You let me in. All the way in. Your world. Your business. Your truth. Everything. And if I can't? Then I leave anyway. Without Hyun's money. Without your protection. I leave, and I build something that's mine. And you lose me for real this time. Not strategically. Actually." Shin looked at her. Really looked. Seeing her maybe for the first time as something other than a chess piece. "Okay," he said. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even trust. But it was a start. And maybe, after 3 years of nothing, a start was enough. The paperwork made it official. Eris Beck Shin, Vice President of Strategic Development, 22% stake in Beck Industries. Her name on the door. Her vote at the table. Her father had fought it for exactly 6 hours before his lawyers explained what a public scandal would cost. Turned out autonomy was easier to grant when the alternative was federal investigation. She sat at the mahogany table now, surrounded by men twice her age who'd spent years dismissing her as Richard Beck's decorative daughter. They didn't dismiss her anymore. Fear was almost as good as respect. She'd take it. The meeting was about expansion, new markets, strategic partnerships. Nothing to do with Shin's world, though the connections hummed beneath the surface of every conversation. You couldn't separate the legitimate from the illegitimate when they'd been tangled together for generations, but at least now she could see the threads, could pull them, could choose which ones to cut and which ones to strengthen. Her office was on the 42nd floor, windows facing east. She'd stood at them this morning watching the sun come up over the harbor, coffee in hand, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly. But purpose, agency, the sense that her life belonged to her again, even if the price had been scorched earth and brutal honesty. The photo on her desk was new. Her and Shin at a charity gala last week. His arm around her waist. Both of them smiling. It almost looked real. Maybe it was real. She wasn't sure yet. Trust took time to rebuild. Sometimes it never fully came back. But they were trying. That counted for something. The penthouse had changed too. Small things. Her books on the living room shelves now, not just in her bedroom. Shin's coffee cup left on the counter in the morning. A shared bathroom. A shared bed. Though some nights one of them still retreated to separate space when the weight got too heavy. They had dinner together now. Most nights. Sometimes they talked about work. Sometimes about nothing. Sometimes they sat in silence that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't hostile either. Just two people learning how to occupy the same space after 3 years of careful avoidance. Shin had kept his promise. Let her in. Not all the way. There were things in his world she didn't want to know. Lines she wasn't ready to cross. But enough. Enough that she understood the decisions he made. Enough that she had a voice in the ones that affected her. She found him in his study at midnight. Papers spread across the desk, the remains of dinner he'd forgotten to eat. He looked up when she entered, surprised. Still not used to her just walking in, even though she could now. Even though he'd asked her to. You should sleep. Eris said, setting down tea she'd made the way he liked it. 3 years of watching from a distance had taught her things. Small details. Preferences he'd never shared because he'd never thought she was paying attention. Soon. He took the tea. Their fingers brushed. Brief. Electric. They were still learning how to touch each other. After 3 years of nothing, every contact felt weighted, significant. "The Ha-jun situation?" she asked, gesturing at the papers. "It's handled. Mostly." She didn't ask for details, didn't need them. Hyun's organization was fracturing from the inside. Shin's evidence, carefully gathered over 3 years, had finally been deployed. Not to police, that wasn't how their world worked, but to the right people. The people who mattered in the shadows where men like Shin and Hyun conducted their real business. Hyun would survive. Men like him always did, but diminished, scattered. No longer a threat, just a memory of one. "He called me yesterday," Eris said. "Hyun." Shin's jaw tightened. And I didn't answer, but he left a message. Said the offer still stands if I ever change my mind. Said he respects what I built. Said he was sorry it had to be this way. "Do you believe him?" She thought about it. Really considered it. "I think he's capable of respect and manipulation at the same time. I think most people are. In your world. In our world." Shin stood, moved around the desk, stopped in front of her. Close, but not touching. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Staying. Choosing this." It was a question he'd asked in different ways over the past 3 weeks. Testing, probing, trying to understand if she'd really chosen him or just chosen the devil she knew over the one she didn't. Eris still didn't have a clean answer. "I regret the 3 years we lost," she said. "I regret that it took me almost leaving for you to see me. I regret that we'll probably never fully trust each other the way people who started honest do. But I don't regret fighting for myself. I don't regret demanding more. And I don't regret—" She paused. Considered. "I don't regret giving us a chance to become something real instead of just walking away from something broken." They went to bed together. Still strange. Still new after 3 years of separation. Shin read contracts. Eris scrolled through emails. Domestic. Almost normal. "I saw your father today," Shin said, not looking up from his papers. "At the club. He congratulated me." "On what?" "Not losing you." Shin set down the contract. "He said you're the smartest Beck in 3 generations. Said I should count myself lucky you decided I was worth the trouble." Eris smiled despite herself. "He's trying to take credit for how I turned out. Typical." "Is he wrong? About me being smart?" "No. About himself being responsible?" "Absolutely. I became this in spite of him. Not because of him." The lights were off now. City glow through the windows. Shin's breathing evening out beside her. Almost asleep, but not quite. "Shin?" "I don't love you yet. I need you to know that. I don't know if I ever will." Silence. Long enough that she thought maybe he'd fallen asleep. Then, "I know. I'm just hoping I get the chance to earn it. Real love, not the idea of it. Not the potential. Actual. That's all I'm hoping for too," she said. And in the dark, in the quiet, she felt his hand find hers. Just holding. No pressure. No demand. Just connection. Tentative and fragile and maybe, eventually, enough to build something true on. Morning came slow. Eris woke before Shin, stood at the windows in a silk robe, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up beneath her. Somewhere down there, Hyun was rebuilding. Her father was scheming. Other players were making their moves on boards she couldn't see. But up here, in this moment, she was just a woman who'd fought for her own life and won. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. The marriage might work. It might not. Shin might earn her love. He might not. The business might thrive. It might collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. But whatever happened next, it would be her choice, her move, her life. And after 3 years of being a piece on someone else's board, that was everything. Behind her, Shin stirred, woke, saw her at the window and didn't speak. Just watched. Learning, maybe, to see her without agenda, without strategy, just as herself. The sun climbed higher, the city spread out below, and heiress Shin took a breath, held it, and prepared for whatever came next. On her terms this time. Finally. And that's where we leave heiress. Not with a perfect ending, but with something harder one. Her own choices. Her own power. Her own life. Finally. If you made it all the way here, 80 minutes with me, thank you. Seriously, drop a comment and tell me, do you think heiress made the right choice? Would you have stayed with Shin, taken Ha-jun's offer, or carved out something completely different? I read every single comment, and I want to know what you think. If this story kept you up later than you planned, if you felt every moment of heiress's isolation and her fight back to herself, hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this. Slow, deep, psychological journeys that don't rush to easy answers. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm building a library of stories that respect your intelligence. Stories about power, betrayal, transformation, and the messy reality of taking your life back. No shortcuts, no fairy tales, just the kind of narratives that stay with you long after they end. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I've got stories about obsession, revenge, forbidden love in dangerous worlds, and women who refuse to stay invisible. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about reclaiming power, someone navigating their own impossible situation, share this with them. Sometimes we need to see someone else fight before we remember we can too. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, choose yourself. Always.